White House put out 2 executive orders. 14305, restoring American airspace sovereignty in June, followed by EO 14307, unleashing American drone dominance. Also came out in June. Plain English, what do these things do? First, 14305, airspace sovereignty, is counter UAS and protection of the U.S. I don't know who was tracking earlier in the year, but there's a lot of really weird drone shit going on. I'm not getting into that because there are plenty of people who went through that in depth. I'm telling you, I live here in DC and it was weird. Okay, airspace sovereignty creates a task force chaired by the National Security Advisor to deal with operational, technical, and regulatory fixes to hostile and unsafe drone actors across critical infrastructure, mass events, and military sites. All right, so actually drone sovereignty dates all the way back to like the Chinese spy balloon. Like, why in the hell do we have a Chinese spy balloon that can just kind of like cruise around like it's, you know, at a hot air balloon festival in San Diego without anybody doing anything about it? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One, predominantly is because the air defense systems that we have are looking for intercontinental ballistic missiles and fighter jets, not slow moving balloons. Also, we didn't pay attention to our airspace because we think we're invincible and we're not. So now we're going to address it. So basically, critical infrastructure, mass events, and military sites take priority, and we're not going to let the bad guys fly over the top of us anymore. Generally, just for America, that's good. But that also means that if you're in the airspace multi-domain awareness category of technology, you're going to be a lot more busy. Okay. It goes into some of the more technical FAA notice to mariners, how they geo-reference different things that are happening. It goes into faster enforcement through the DOJ and the DHS. It's providing grants for gear to detect and ID counter UAS or UAS threats with counter UAS technologies. And then it's got a 30 and a 60-day requirement to expand access to remote ID operator data for use within 60 days. So basically, they want to know who's doing stuff and they want to stop people from doing stuff that they don't want them to do. In action, what we're going to see is the National Counter UAS Task Force. We're going to see a National Counter UAS Training Center that goes into the Joint Terrorism Task Force. This is going to be benchmarked on the 2026 FIFA event that's going to happen here in the US. And it specifically addresses BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight operation. So if anybody's been watching anything about Ukraine, if you've got a drone at home and you're just flying in your backyard with like a little joystick and you're watching it go around, that's not what is going on in Ukraine right now. Obviously, they are flying these things, 10, 15 kilometers. Obviously, you can't see them at that point. You're in the heads up. And that type of flight in the U.S. has been highly restricted and basically constrained to testing and evaluation only over military bases, which makes it very difficult if you're a drone manufacturer to test and demonstrate your things if you can only do it on a military base of which you can't get on. So they're addressing that. So this air superiority EO directs the FAA to issue a beyond visual line of sight rule within 30 days and a target for a final rule within 240 days that sets the safety metrics and fixes the parts of the restriction against beyond visual line of sight operation that's hindering American company's ability to be superior and dominant. Additionally, it goes into the AI side of this. So the FAA has to deploy AI tools within 120 days that comply with all the FAR and OMB regulations, but it's saying, hey, get faster at getting your waivers and getting your approvals out so that we can do the damn thing. Significant efforts towards testing range for eVTOL pilots, UAS test ranges, and integrated pilot programs for, within the next 30 to 90 days, and then with a 3-year rolling requirement of how we are providing more test training and pilot certification for these new technologies that clearly aren't going anywhere. It directs the DoD to expand and update Blue UAS. So there's so much going on in Blue UAS. I think probably that just warrants its own thing. Actually, funny story. I remember when I was on the Hill and Blue UAS came out, people were fucking pissed, up in arms. They're like, don't tell me what to do. And I remember talking to DIU and I said, are you guys really going to be the clearinghouse for all drone certification? They were, no, absolutely not. No. We just want to say, hey, we know which ones are good and which ones are bad. Obviously that turned into a gate for compliance, and now you have to be Blue UAS compliant because of all the other things that have happened. And now they're moving it out of DIU to another testing organization, which actually makes a lot more sense. But anyways, Blue UAS, NDA compliant drones are all a focus here. Department of Commerce and the FAA have to deal with the drone supply chain and publish a list of high-risk vendors. Again, a lot of this shit comes from China. Batteries, flight controllers, a lot of GPUs, a lot of the carbon fiber actually comes from China. Very hard to get away from that because they have just such a massive commercial lead on the international drone market through DJI predominantly, and then other drone companies are just so far ahead of this, and they have the supply chains and the manufacturing, and we need to get off of their parts because, I don't know, if a war starts with them and they cut off our supply chain to drones that we're planning on killing them with, it's not going to work out really well. It also directs Department of State, Commerce, DoD, Import, Export, the DFC to expedite civil UAS exports to trusted partners and make U.S.-made U.S. integration a priority. When this administration means dominance and superiority, they mean not only does the U.S. have to use U.S. drones for military, law enforcement, probably down to certain infrastructure, critical infrastructure, energy, but we want the world of our partners to be using the same thing. That's how we get the scale in the U.S. drone industry to compete with China. So while this is great and a long time coming, there are organizations out there who have been advocating for this for a long time. Shout out to AUVSI, who's really led the way in saying, hey, look, this is a very, very real market, and this is going to be the future. It took a war in Ukraine for everybody, I think, to realize that, but they were right from the start, and they've done a great job doing this. There's a reality check here, right? The timelines are aggressive, 30, 60, 90, 120 days. Nobody does anything that fast. Let's just be real. They're going to run out of time. They're going to need waivers. Things will happen. They probably won't happen as fast as they want, but it doesn't change that the administration is very clearly signaling their aggressiveness towards wanting to get these done. Compliance is still real, right? You're still going to have to abide by all of the rules, whether, it be licensing, spectrum requirements, airport procedures, Blue UAS, NDAA compliance, FAR regulations until they all get fixed, ITAR and export control kind of things. But at the end of the day, they're making all the steps in the right direction. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And we all just have to be real that when all this stuff is implemented, it's not like, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. You're still going to have to do stuff, and you're still going to have to be compliant. You're still going to have your ATOs and your CMMC. You're not going to get away from that, but the parts that suck that should go away are going to go away. And then, finally, I mean, this is an area that the DoD does not lead in. It leads in the use of and the manufacturing around drones in general, but it has huge civilian crossover. FAA, FCC, DOJ is still going to be heavily involved in this, which obviously is going to lead to potentially some friction about getting these things across the finish line. Either way, it's a step in the right direction. I tell people all the time, don't take my passion and enthusiasm for this for optimism. I'm glad these things are happening, but I know it's still the government and it's still going to take time. So everybody just needs to be real about it. We're moving in the right direction. It's not utopia. So thanks, Mike. Things are happening. Okay, what the hell do I do about that? Smart guy who knows things and stuff. How do I do this? I'm new here. Okay, cool. So first and foremost, add all this shit to your one pager. God forbid, God help anybody who has like watched these in sequence. It's just redundant at this point. You need to know, right? Get smarter, get educated, sell more shit, right? You need to know these things. They need to be just as common language as all the other, I don't know, technical nerd shit that you talk all day, right? If you do business with the government, you have to speak the language of the government. Make sure your one pager says BV LOS ready under EO XYZ that list your compliance features. Remote ID, geofencing, decoding, NDA compliance, Blue UAS compliance, like all this stuff. Just make sure that it's ready to go now, right? Make sure that you're leading with that. We are compliant in all these things. Take that question out of anybody's mind when they're talking to you. Before you sit down for that meeting, they should know that you've checked all those boxes. Now, they may ask you how, but that's a much better conversation to be having than can you. You can go even further and show that you've done it, right? If you have run exercises, if you've been at exercises, experimentations, you've gone out to T-Rex, you've gone to a Trident Spectre or a Project Convergence or something like that, and you've run this, you've run your ConOp, you've detected and avoided threats, you have lost link and risk mitigation factors. Talk about that. Tell the story. Build the case study. Say, hey, look, we have done this and we've been evaluated doing this. If you're thinking about going and dealing with anybody on the civilian market, obviously the critical infrastructure segment is going to be a huge opportunity. That's going to be airports, rail, stadiums, oil and gas, other energy sites, probably data centers, things like that, right? Show that you know how to operate in that environment, that you have all the criteria and the checks in the box to operate around restricted areas, that you're 2209 compliant, that you have means and methods for alerting security and their internal operations, and really just outline any kind of compliance you want. If you want to work in one of these highly restricted areas, you just have to know the lingo there too. Lining up international partners for the export that they want to do, understand what's ITAR controlled, understand what's not, understand what countries you can sell to and you can't. Those are going to be probably top of mind of saying, where do we have relationships? Who needs UAS? Who doesn't? The export that this is specifically talking about is on the civil side. So obviously consider how your technology applies to that. If all you make is one-way loitering killer Terminator drone, you're probably not selling that, I don't know, Zimbabwe. These two EOs together address a lot of problems we've had in the industry and open up a lot of new opportunities. But at the end of the day, if you're dealing in drones, you're dealing with a multi-jurisdiction, highly regulated environment, FCC, FAA, DHS, and probably a couple others that I'm forgetting about. Just get compliant, know what's required of you, and get after it, because regulations aren't going away, especially if you're trying to operate domestically. Get compliant, get on board, and get ahead of your competition, right? Learn more, know more, sell more.